Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. I'm so glad you're with me today as we study one of my all-time favorite books in the Old Testament, the book of Esther. And in the book of Esther, there are two courageous women whose lives we'll briefly study. One is Queen Vashti, and then the other, Queen Esther. Both are examples of courage and acting on the faith that they have. Both of them were placed in a time and a place to make a difference. And just like Vashti and Esther, God's placed you in the right place at the right time so that you can make a difference. And one other thing that we'll focus on today is just like Vashti and Esther, they're faced with fear, they're faced with opposition. When that happens, especially with the example of Esther, you can invite God to walk with you. Now a little bit of background. In Esther, the king's name is Ahasuerus. Now that is the Hebrew term, but most scholars believe that his name was Xerxes. That's the kind of historical name. So Xerxes is identified as the king Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. Esther starts off with queen, but Esther's not the queen, it's Queen Vashti. Vashti means beautiful. And that seems to play a major role in the first chapter or two of the book of Esther. King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, is going to have a nice party. It's going to be 180 days. Chapter 1, verse 3, got all these people coming. Verse 4, he's showing off all the riches of his kingdom. Look what I have. And we're going to have this little bit of an activity for 100 at the end of verse 4, even 104 score or 80 days. And then the real party begins. This party is going to be 7 days where you can have all of the wine of the king's house, which is the best wine there is, for free. I think they call it an open bar. So Esther chapter 1 verse 7, and they gave them, all these guests, drink in vessels of gold. And there's lots of beautiful vessels. And royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. You don't have to drink this, but it's free. You're welcome to do it. And I think maybe the really thing there that catches my attention is that last part, according to every man's pleasure. Open bar, and you can do whatever you want. Now, at the end of 7 days, I don't know where the idea comes from, but it's the idea, hey, maybe who has a cuter wife? Well, they decide they want to see Vashti. And on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, I read in that, oh, he's drunk. He commands these 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus, the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king, with the crown royal, get her all looking royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Now I pause here. Just a few lessons from Queen Vashti. 1, there are consequences on others when people are drinking. I know that's kind of an obvious one, but I thought I'd just write up there anyway. And those who are arrogant or who feel self-important, they tend to focus on themselves and often see others as objects. Queen Vashti is objectified. But the queen, verse 12, here is a woman of courage. She refuses to come at the king's command, verse 12. Therefore, the king was not just mad, not just very mad, very wroth, and his anger burned in him. You're in a Persian society that when you disobey a king's command, he has every right to execute you. He can do whatever he wants. And because he's inebriated, maybe that's causing him just to having that anger burn in him. He is savoring his anger. And he's getting egged on by his friends. Now, there's a common belief in here that sometimes we don't read between the lines on this. Most biblical scholars believe that that little phrase, bring Queen Vashti before him in her royal crown, the intent of that is that she's going to be wearing nothing but the royal crown as she's brought to him. He's going to put her on display in a very icky way. So another quick lesson from Queen Vashti. You display courage when faced with an improper request. Now the king seems to give in to peer pressure. They say things like, look, if you don't do something about Queen Vashti, it's going to affect us too. This is verse 17. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so they might despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. They don't really care what's going on other than for themselves. This is going to affect us. If the queen says no, they may say no. This Persian Empire is a very male-dominated society. Likewise, verse 18, all the ladies of Persia and Media of the day shall say unto the king's princesses, which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there rise too much contempt and wrath. In other words, this is going to affect us too. You got to deal with her. Well, another lesson. Queen Vashti is beautiful. And sometimes in lessons, and we do it in especially, I don't know, sometimes seminary or Sunday school, we tend to say, oh, look, this person is beautiful or they're handsome, and look at how shallow they are. And sometimes, like Queen Vashti, and Esther too, there's beauty there, but there's spiritual depth too. They're spiritual giants. You can't judge someone on their appearance, even if they're beautiful. No one is the sum of their appearance. Another lesson from Queen Vashti, don't compromise on your values. Even someone like Queen Vashti, who we don't know has any understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who understands anything even of the law of Moses, but she is living to the light that she has in her life. And she has a part to play in God's plan too. And I just pause here and I wonder, had she not stood up with courage, Esther would never have been queen. I'm reading between the lines thinking Queen Vashti was inspired to stand up. And I don't think it turns out very well for her. Because in verse 9, if it please the king as suggested, there go a royal command from him, and be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it might not be altered, that Vashti come no more before the king. You can't come back in, but give her a royal estate, but she never comes back into your presence. Vashti is banished, and the rest of her life, she's not recorded in Scripture, and I've wondered what happened to her. Here's a woman who stands up and is courageous and does what she should do, and she loses almost everything. One day, on the other side of the veil, I want to meet Queen Vashti and just say, tell me about the rest of your life, and tell me now what God has in store for you. So not only does everybody have a part to play in God's plan, but not everything works out the way you want it to at first. Especially, you have to just trust that it will work out for those who love God, especially when it doesn't seem like it's going to happen today, as Paul reminded us. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I trust that's going to happen to Queen Vashti. And one day we'll learn, as Paul Harvey used to say, for those of you who know who Paul Harvey was, we'll know the rest of the story. Now we're moving a little bit into Queen Esther. Now this is Esther chapters 2 through 8. Esther, her name means star. A couple other characters, Mordecai, her uncle, means little man, and Haman means magnificent. I would have thought that the names would have been reversed, because Mordecai, he's pretty magnificent, pretty awesome, and Haman, he really just wants to think about himself and seems to be the little man. But it's different. Esther's an orphan, and she's being raised by her uncle Mordecai. So I just start off with a few lessons from Esther. Even though she's an orphan, being raised by her uncle, she's an example of somebody who may be ordinary, maybe no name behind her. There's not this tradition, lineage, but God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. She's invited into the women's quarters, as the king now is looking for a new wife. You can see this is King Ahasuerus' compound. And you can see the king's gate, the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. The women's quarters are on maybe the top left-hand side of your screen. And I just point that out because every day her uncle is coming to check on her. I don't think that uncle gets to see her every day, but he comes every day. Esther 2:11. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house. He doesn't go in to know how Esther did and what should become of her. And I imagine every day he's asking about her. Here's somebody who just knows and loves Esther, whether Esther knows that he's there every day or not. So maybe another little lesson from Esther. You might not know it either, but you have somebody who cares about you. And I think that is on this side of the veil. I also believe that's on the other side of the veil too. Some of our fathers or great-grandmothers or grandmothers who may be past the other side of the veil are interested in our lives today and are hoping and praying for our success. When the time came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing except for what Haggai. Now, Haggai's the king's chamberlain. He's giving her advice. Here's what you should do. She's doing nothing other than what he's advised her to do. She wants nothing else other than to follow his advice. Now, Esther was winning favor in all the eyes who saw her. She's not only pretty, but she's listening to people who have wisdom. So maybe another lesson from Esther. She listens. And God places mentors in our life to teach us wisdom. And we really need to listen to and act on what they're telling us. Because listening to and acting on truth is wisdom. Well, as you may know the story of Esther, Mordecai is supposed to be bowing to certain people. One of them is Haman. And he doesn't. Chapter 3, verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did he reverence, then did Haman full of wrath. And he thought to scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for there had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Well, you won't bow. Maybe there's other people who won't bow. I'll get you all. So Haman has his plan. He goes before the king and says, hey, chapter 3, verse 8, there's certain people, they're all around. They don't keep your laws. And it's really not in your favor to allow them to be like this. Verse 9, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to bring those who have charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. I want to kill them all, and I'll pay you to do it. If you just authorize it, I'll do it. I'll pay for it. And the king took his ring from his hand, authorization. You're going to be authorized to do this. And gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. He hates them so much. Wow, 10,000 talents of silver. That's incredible. And letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day. Even on the 13th day, 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. We're not only going to kill you, we're going to take all your belongings that you have as payment on one particular day. So back to Esther. Life will not always be perfect. And that's maybe an overstatement, a generalization. But there can be things that are out of your control in life that are going to happen to you and family and people you love. And there's nothing you can do to control about it. And that's maybe a lesson to do with Esther, but let's look at what she does. She talks to Mordecai. And Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. And this is good. This was an in-between. Think not with yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. You're next on the line too. Well, I love what Mordecai is telling her. Going back, if you don't respond, guess what? You'll die too. But If you don't act for God in verse 14, he also indicates he'll get someone else. And sometimes I think that's a great lesson to learn. If we don't act, God's going to maybe find someone else to do it for us. And since I didn't put this in my notes, let me just read the whole verse, Esther 4:14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement, or you can say their relief, and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. If you stay quiet, God's not going to let his people be destroyed. Someone else will give them relief. Someone else will deliver them. But, Esther, you're in a position right now to make a difference. And then there's this phrase that maybe most of us know. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now I pause. I think that's also true for us. President Russell M. Nelson has been teaching recently, and many of the prophets have. We have been sent to the earth at this time for a purpose, for such a time as this. President Nelson said this, my beloved brothers and sisters, you were born to be true millennials. You are a chosen generation, foreordained by God to do a remarkable work, to help prepare the people of this world for the second coming of the Lord. Now that was given in 2016 to a talk to young single adults. And then 2018, President Nelson said this, my dear extraordinary youth, you are sent to earth at this precise time, the most crucial time in the history of the world, to help gather Israel. There's nothing happening on this earth right now that's more important than that. There's nothing of greater consequence, absolutely nothing, my beloved younger brothers and sisters. You are among the best the Lord has ever sent to this world. You have the capacity to be smarter and wiser and more impact on the world than any previous generation. You are the hope of Israel, children of the promised day. So maybe just like Esther, God has you in the right place at the right time to make a difference. Now, those last two quotes were definitely to millennials and even a more recent generation. And you may be saying, oh, what if you're my age? I've been hearing things like that since I was a teenager. There is a doctrine of foreordination where God has foreordained women and men to do certain tasks, to have certain callings. On the church's website, it says this about foreordination, quote, the doctrine of foreordination applies to all members of the church, not just the Savior and his prophets. Before the creation of the earth, faithful women were given certain responsibilities, and faithful men were foreordained to certain priesthood duties. As people prove themselves worthy, they will be given opportunity to fulfill the assignments that they've received. And also states, in the premortal spirit world, God appointed certain spirits to fulfill specific missions during their mortal lives. This is called foreordination. Foreordination does not guarantee that individuals receive certain callings or responsibilities. Such opportunities come in this life as a result of the righteous exercise of agency, just as foreordination came as a result of righteousness in the premortal existence. Now back to the topic of Esther. She gives Esther back this reply because it's through a medium. Verse 16, go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. If you go unbidden, unannounced, uninvited to the king at this time, you're taking your life in your own hands. He may choose to have mercy and listen to you, but if not, and you're very much dependent on what the topic is, what kind of mood he's in, he has every right to kill you. That may seem harsh to us today, but she understands the realities of this. So she's asking everybody to fast and pray, and she does it. Another couple lessons from Esther from those two verses. First, take the lead in action. She tells everybody else to fast and pray, but she's doing it too. And with God's help, we can step out in faith and fight our fears. And when you're facing problems, when you're facing your fears, invite God to have his presence with you. And like Esther, she's willing to make the sacrifice. If I perish, I perish. But I'm going to do what's right and what I need to do. And for her, never lose hope. And then I add a quote from Gandalf. There's a time in Lord of the Rings where Frodo is losing hope. Frodo says this, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all those live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. We all have to decide." Wait, I have to rephrase that. I'm just going to redo that whole paragraph. Sorry about this. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all those who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." As President Lorenzo Snow said, very similarly, it may become necessary in the future, and this is the point I wish to make, for some of the saints to act the part of Esther, the queen, and be willing to sacrifice anything and everything that is required of their hands for the purpose of working out the deliverance of the Latter-day Saints. We have been blessed with many opportunities and responsibilities in our life. Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf has reminded us, the Lord gave you your responsibilities for a reason. There may be people and hearts only you can reach and touch. Perhaps no one else can do it in quite the same way. We have come for such a time as this. And I pause if you can see the screen. That's actually a screenshot from a video that the church produced. The title of the movie is For Such a Time as This. And it's in the Media Library video, made in 2011. I would highly recommend it. This is probably one of the best church videos I believe the church has made. Love it. And it comes to this point in the story, and to the end of the video, where she is now going to approach the king. She knows, I just love the scene. She looks at the guards, and the guards are not looking at her, and then they finally kind of like, okay, we'll let you in. This is your neck on the line, nothing to do with us, and they let her in. And I love as she just queenly just walks in front and stands there, ready for whatever the king decides, to listen to her or not. But then I thought, we have choices like that for us today, where we stand before a door and do we go in because it's going to take courage? Maybe just thinking, what kind of choices are you facing today that may require the courage of Esther? I don't think it's to walk in to see whether a king is going to have a good mood and keep you alive. Some of the fears that we face are very trivial to others, but very real to us. But we can learn, like Esther, to invite God as we have our daily discipleship and face our fears. Well, Esther goes in and goes in front of the king and pauses appropriately. The king says, "Come on up." And it's so, chapter 5, verse 2, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near, touched the top of the scepter. And said the king unto her, "What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given thee to half of the kingdom." Well, we had that last thought of never losing hope, but there's also realize you do your part and God will reward you more abundantly than you can ever imagine. And I pause in this story because I believe that's going to happen to Vashti too. Esther gets a reward right now. Vashti, earlier in our story today, we don't know that she ever got a reward other than maybe a little bit of a punishment. But I believe that even Vashti will get her reward too. Well, I had to show you this because this is a Rembrandt. This is the king. There's Esther there. And in the darkness, well, there's Haman. And Haman had that little plot. We're going to kill all the Jews. Ends up dying on the same scaffolding that he was going to kill all the Jews on. And now I just skip because not often is this part told. This is kind of the rest of the story in chapter 9. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in the province of the king of Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the month of the same yearly, and the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make their days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. I love the idea to remind others of God's deliverance to you. He wrote everybody. Maybe today you could write a post, something on social media. Just a note, here's what God's done for me today. And with social media, it will go far and wide. Well, just a couple teaching thoughts. In this week's reading, we've had the example of two women of courage. Consider, maybe with your family or a class, to identify some women in their lives who also have courage and faith. I don't think you have to go very far to have examples of women of faith in your life, in your ward, in your classrooms. And like Esther, God has placed you in the right place at the right time to make a difference. A third kind of teaching thought, God's placed mentors in your lives. You could stop and talk about the mentors in your life. And maybe that invitation, as there are mentors in your life, who today will you mentor? Is there something that you could teach from the Come Follow Me lessons and from your readings that you've learned this week that you could teach someone else that would bless their life, to help them in a time to overcome their fears, to show courage in a time of opposition? And my last kind of teaching thought, when you're facing your fears, seek God and invite Him as a part of your daily discipleship. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today as we study the book of Esther. Hope you have a great day. Keep smiling.